Welcome everyone to the dissolved oxygen and temperature session. I'm going to get us started and then Eric will take over and then I'll swing it back to me. That's how we're going to work this today. So, Eric, do you want to get back on?
Yeah, I
I forgot
suppose.
about this part.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Eric Elgin. I am a aquatic ecologist with Michigan State University Extension, working on lake conservation statewide, and I'm the CLMP Lake Program Manager who will be helping all of you with any of your needs and the program in general. So I'm here for you. And then Tamara, I'll move it to you.
Alrighty. And as Eric said, I'm Tamara Lipsey. I work for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, which funds MiCorps. We consider MiCorps one of our data collection programs, and technically, the dissolved oxygen temperature meters belong to us. So I do a lot of the maintenance and answer questions regarding the dissolved oxygen and temperature meters. So I'm going to help out with today's presentation as well. So we do this one in person and online, but I kind of in general just want everybody to add into the chat which of these most applies to you. How comfortable are you with dissolved oxygen temperature monitoring? Enter into the chat on one if you're not entirely sure why dissolved oxygen and temperature is important, but you're here to learn. Enter a two if you're signed up to sample oxygen, dissolved oxygen and temperature this year, and you're here to learn. Number three, if you've sampled it before, but you want a refresher. Or number four, if you've done it for many years, but you always can learn more. And I'm going to look through. It looks like we have one, three, two. Hmm. So we got a little bit of everything, I feel like. Mostly one, twos, and threes, it looks like. So great. It's just good to know what kind of audience we have here, but I'm especially excited to have the number twos here to learn about what they'll be doing this year. Hmm. So Eric's going to go over why dissolved oxygen is important, and give a program overview, and then I will go through the specifics of the equipment and the procedure and what to do at the end of the year. And this is just a picture of the dissolved oxygen meter. That's the most current one. It's called a YSI Pro 20. The way dissolved oxygen is measured is we drop the silver probe that's on a cord throughout the water column, and we measure dissolved oxygen temperature from the surface all the way to about 2 feet above the bottom of the lake. All right, and I'm going to hand it back over to Eric.
Thanks, Tamara. Yes, and that's an important thing that Tamara just mentions, that we collect temperature and oxygen from the top of the lake through the water column to near the bottom. And this is important for many different reasons, and I'm going to walk through that here for the next few minutes or so. And I'm first going to start us off with just talking about temperature, because although oxygen is really important, temperature is really going to drive what's going on with oxygen as we look at that. So temperature is incredibly important because it impacts all sorts of components of a lake ecosystem, from density zones. So what happens is that um, water changes density as temperature changes. And so the most dense at or how should I phrase this? At 39 degrees Fahrenheit, water is at its most dense. So if it's colder than 39, it's less dense. If it's warmer than 39, it's less dense. And so what we would say is for winter, this is a really obvious one. If it gets close to freezing and then it freezes, we have ice that floats on the surface because lower density water will be on top of higher density water. And so this creates these very, um, can be very dramatic zones in a lake that um, keep different things in certain different levels. And I'll talk about that here coming up. One of those things that changes is the chemical components of the water. The surface of the water might be different from the bottom parts of the water because of temperature stratification, the change of temperature from the top to the bottom. And then all of these things can precipitate to fish habitat availability. If the water's too warm, there's only certain species that can handle that temperature, and so on. So one of the best ways to show this is to kind of walk through a season. And we'll start off in spring. The ice has come off of the lake. And if I'm, you may have heard of something called lake turnover or lake mixing. Well, what's happening at this point in time is as that ice melts, the lake is the same temperature from the top to the bottom, and wind is stirring it up and around, and what how we represent this in a graph is this upside down graph that you've seen for Secchi disk and other parameters. Zero is referring to the surface of the lake, and this is as we go deeper. The red line is representing temperature, so it's really cold and it's pretty much the same from the top to the bottom. During this time, it's not just temperature, but during this time, nutrients and other things dissolved in the water are mixed freely up and down the water column. And so when we collect phosphorus in the springtime during this 2-week window after ice out, we're gathering that phosphorus during spring mixing, which allows us to get a sense of how much phosphorus is in the system as a whole. Now, as the sun and warms the surface of the lake, so we're moving from early spring into late spring into early summer, we start to change the density of water. The surface is warming, and that creates this lower density water that is floating on top of cold water below. We show that in this same graph. Now we've seen warm water is over here, and it changes very quickly. A few feet down and then gets cold and is consistently cold in the lower parts. So to show just a little bit more about this, this is called summer stratification, and you can think of a lake is becoming like a 3-layer cake. And we can represent it like this. And of course, we have some fun terminology that we can all learn. And so our 3-layer cake, our top part of the cake is called the epilimnion. That is the warm, low dense bits of water on the surface. This is all mixing around. A lot of life is happening in this because it also is often where there's enough light for photosynthesis to occur. As we go down that jam layer in our 3-layer cake, usually it's a little tighter, so it's not as big as the epilimnion or the bottom hypolimnion. This is where the thermocline exists. That temperature is changing dramatically, which many of us have probably experienced if you've jumped off of your boat in the middle of the lake and it's warm, but you knife down into very cold water. You're experiencing thermal stratification. You're actually moving through the warm water, through the thermocline into the colder depths. And that change can be very dramatic. And then you enter into the bottom layer, the hypolimnion. It's often dark. It is cold. There can be oxygen, but sometimes there's not oxygen, and we'll talk about that here soon. And sometimes there can be lots of phosphorus down there, and sometimes not much at all. And what's happening here with that thermocline is it's almost like a physical barrier for movement. And so um, as stuff up in the epilimnion is happening, not all of it gets through into the hypolimnion, just like what's happening down in the hypolimnion doesn't make it through the thermocline into the epilimnion. And there's, again, that classic curve that we will see develop through the summer months. And this is what usually July, August, and September look like. So then the sun starts to lower in its angle. The atmosphere gets cooler and the surface water cools down. And eventually it cools down to where it gets really close to the same temperature as the bottom waters. And now we have fall mixing. We have a fall turnover event. And in many of our deep lakes, this is what we see. We see a lake that mixes in the springtime, it stratifies, and then it mixes in the fall, and we call those dimictic lakes. Now, that's what happens. These dimictic lakes, very common across the temperate regions of the world, but it doesn't happen in all lakes. If your lake is generally shallow, so that can be lakes 15 feet, approximately 15 feet and under, well, those lakes don't mix just twice. They mix constantly throughout the open water season, and we call those polymictic, mixing many times. And that's because there's just not enough water to create that separation in layers. Instead, the whole water column warms up. And even if there's some weak stratification that occurs through time due to weather patterns, it can easily get broken up by a storm. Okay, let's talk a little bit more or now about dissolved oxygen. So dissolved oxygen is very important, obviously, because things need to breathe in the water. And so how do our lakes gain oxygen? Well, they gain it through diffusion from the atmosphere, so from the surface water into the atmosphere, and through photosynthesis. If we all can remember our fun biology classes, is that what's an output of photosynthesis is oxygen creation. And so that's how the majority of oxygen gets in is through photosynthesis and the atmosphere. And then there is an output. And one of the major outputs is decomposition. So when there's bacteria and fungus decomposing organic material, they use up oxygen. And this is important as we go into the late summer months of a stratified lake. So this is why I'm just going to describe that here. So oxygen, as the temperature changes, and you get and you get stratification, that thermocline, like I mentioned, really is a barrier to a lot of stuff from the top of the lake to the bottom of the lake. And one of those is dissolved oxygen. And so in the spring, everything's mixing. Dissolved oxygen is found throughout the water column. But then thermal stratification takes place. And oftentimes, it's now the inputs of oxygen are cut off from the hypolimnion. You still get plenty of oxygen where there's photosynthesis in the upper parts of the lake and with the connection to the atmosphere. But that thermocline acts as almost a physical barrier to the dissolved oxygen moving down further into the water column. And because of the decomposition that happens at the bottom of a lake, of some lakes, you can become devoid of oxygen. And this can change lots of things from fish habitat to phosphorus release from the lake sediments. And I'll just bring us back to this familiar graph so that we're still seeing this is the temperature curve in summer during summer stratification. Well, what can happen in a lake that has a lot of algal growth, a lot of life happening in the upper parts of the lake? Well, when there's lots of life, there's oftentimes lots of death, and things fall through the water column. When they fall through the water column, they accumulate and get decomposed. And what we can see is this classic curve in our eutrophic and sometimes mesotrophic lakes. So we have an abundance. This is the oxygen curve, and we have an abundance of oxygen in the upper parts of the lake. But right around where that thermocline is, where the temperature changes dramatically, it cuts way over and can be quite low in the hypolimnion, the bottom part, or it can even get to zero. Now, what if the lake doesn't have a lot of algae, plant, and a lot of life and growth happening? Those are our oligotrophic lakes. Well, in that case, when there's not a whole lot of life, there's not a whole lot of things falling down the water column, dying and being decomposed. And in this case, the bottom layer, the hypolimnion, can maintain its oxygen levels. And this is what the curve looks like. And you actually have more oxygen that can be found in the colder depths of the lake because cold water can hold on to more oxygen. And that's pretty neat as well. Those types of lakes can handle, if anyone on this presentation, those lakes can hold special fish, our cold water fish. One in particular that we're really interested in right now in protecting and preserving is a cisco, which is a cold water fish that requires cold water and high oxygen. And shows the many different types of dissolved oxygen curves that can occur. And I've already shown this one. So this is temperature. So it's showing that the lake um, is stratified. And then this is a curve where there's very low decomposition below, and most oxygen is still found in the bottom parts of the lake. Whereas in our eutrophic lake, shown here, our oxygen actually gets driven down to zero as you get down in there because of the decomposition that's taking place and that is not being replaced by oxygen from above. But you can get some really fascinating ones that I just wanted to show. There's actually some that are quite common. I'm going to skip to this one right here in that curve that's quite common in many of our clear lakes that tend to be more mesotrophic is that we are stratified, shown by this dashed line, but we get a bump of oxygen in the middle part of the lake. And so I know we're all virtual right now, but I just want to, I'm asking the question, how could that be? What's happening around that metalimnion, in the metalimnion, on the thermocline that's happening here? Well, what's happening here is in a clear lake uh, with some nutrients is that light can penetrate down to this zone where there can be a accumulation of different types of algae. And they can kind of take advantage of some of the nutrients from below and the light above, and they can have an algal bloom that's not found on the surface, but it's happening down in the water column. And as they photosynthesize, they're releasing oxygen. You get this bump of oxygen. And then just to show one other that is fairly common in our CLMP lakes is sometimes you can also get a lot of bacteria hanging out in the thermocline area, and they can actually decompose so much of organic matter before it reaches the bottom, and they can actually use up some of that oxygen in that zone, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. So this is what we gain. It's pretty exciting when we're able to use those meters that Tamara just mentioned, the Pro 20 that we use in our program, where we are collecting temperature and dissolved oxygen as we go down and through time. So starting in May all the way through September, we get a chance to see how our lake sets up in stratification and how our dissolved oxygen changes through time. Here's real life CLMP data. I'll say, showing a very stratified lake, very warm water here. The change in temperature is dramatic, changing very quickly in just a few feet of water and then stabilizing again. And then our dissolved oxygen in orange here with that bubble up because of photosynthesis that is occurring there. So, some of the consequences and things to piece together, I've kind of alluded to it, is on lakes that are cold water lakes. What we get is dissolved oxygen and temperature are equal throughout and are high and found throughout the water column. And so fish habitat that require cold, well oxygenated water, the habitat is up and down the water column. But as summer stratification sets in, these cold water fish may not be able to handle physiologically that warm water in the upper parts of the lake. Even though there's tons of oxygen, they just can't be up there. And so then they find themselves going deeper into the lake. The problem is if decomposition is high enough, oxygen becomes too low for them as well. And so they begin to get squeezed. And we call this the oxythermal squeeze, because then by late summer, so this is August and September, we're starting to become concerned. Eventually, this can squeeze so much that they can lose their habitat and they get a pinch. And at this point, they have nowhere to go. They can't handle the warmth above. They can't handle the lack of oxygen below, and they are lost in that lake. And so there's a lot of conservation activities that are happening around the state, identifying these lakes and then protecting this thermal oxygen habitat that we find there. And now to move into a consequence in our chemistry of our lakes, this is also a stratification, temperature stratification and dissolved oxygen also have effect on phosphorus availability. So when oxygen is present, iron and phosphorus bind together and sink through the water column, and they sink to the bottom sediments. And when oxygen is present, that phosphorus is bound and stays there. But what happens if we're in a lake that has like more eutrophic waters, and so they lose their oxygen in the lower parts, the hypolimnion? Well, what happens is that bond breaks and phosphorus becomes available in the lower parts of the lake. And although the thermocline is good at keeping it kind of in the lower part, when stratification breaks, a lot of phosphorus is released, and you can get a different kind of algal bloom. Um, and later in the summer slash fall when that occurs. And there can also be some leakage that occurs where phosphorus is leaks up into the upper parts, into the photic zone, where there's enough light for photosynthesis to occur. So why monitor temperature and dissolved oxygen in your lake? It's pretty neat. It can describe a lot of different things in your lake. It relates to a lot of different people within your lake community that makes this data really fun. Anglers love it. People who swim love it. People just who are fascinated with what's going on, or maybe people who are action oriented and they want to help preserve the lake and protect the lake. Well, knowing what's going on with this dissolved oxygen is important to know that. And so it's a really great parameter to be involved with. Um, and something I didn't mention is dissolved oxygen temperature and dissolved oxygen can change through time. Like how your lake stratifies can change. And we're very aware of this because our ice is becoming depleted throughout the temperate regions of the world. As ice declines, we actually see an increase in length of time of stratification. If your lake is stratified longer than it normally had in the past, what could be a consequence? Well, what it could be is that if you're stratified longer, the bottom parts of the lake are, for a longer period, not able to be replenished with oxygen from the upper parts of the lake. And you can get a higher chance of losing your oxygen and therefore losing important habitat, and then also changing the chemistry of the water. And so there's all sorts of things that we can look at. What happens in the watershed, changes in the watershed can also motivate changes in dissolved oxygen. And so it's a great parameter to understand through time as you're detecting changes in your lake. So take a breath, and I hope you found that interesting. And now I'm going to change it over to Tamara, who's going to teach you on how to collect this great data.
So first, everyone will need a meter, and we have about 43 meters that we can um, loan out to people. It's becoming a more and more popular parameter as we have great volunteers who stick around year after year. So we do have a limited number that we can give out to everyone. So some people choose to purchase their own meter. If you borrow one of our meters, I do the maintenance on it, which isn't a ton, at the end of the year and at the beginning of the year to make sure it's ready to go. If you choose your own to buy your own meter, the benefit is you get to use it whenever you want to. You don't have to give it back at the end of the year. If you want to keep measuring in September, later in September, you can do that. You don't have to worry about sharing. Sometimes we have to have lakes share, especially if they're close to one another, so that more people can borrow a meter. If you choose to purchase your own, they run about $3,000 a piece. That's with everything. So that's the meter, the cable, which is about 100 feet on average, unless you need a deeper one. It includes a nice case, a weight to help weight down the meter, and more. So that's something to think about. Talk to us if you're interested in purchasing one so we can let you know what type to buy. If you are borrowing a meter, the meters are distributed by mid-May. So a lot of people picked up their meters at the MLSA conference last week. A few people came to Lansing yesterday and picked theirs up. And I also gave some meters to other people who came to MLSA. So you probably, if you couldn't come, you probably received an email from me, yes, or Monday, telling you who has your meter and how we're going to get it to you. You're going to measure dissolved oxygen and temperature twice a month, May through September. Next slide. So these are the two types of meter that we allow as part of the CLMP program. The one on the left is a YSI 550A. That's an older model. It's no longer sold, and as far as I know, parts are not available. But we know that there are lakes that have been participating in this parameter for years. Their YSI 550A is still working well, so we do allow data to be submitted if you use that type of meter. The newer meter is called a YSI Pro 20, and that's if you're borrowing a meter, all of our meters are now Pro 20s. They have some advantages. They're a little quicker to calibrate, and they're just a little less finicky overall. This is a picture of the probe of each of the types of meters, the one on the left being the 550A and the one on the right being the Pro 20. They're really similar to each other. Um, they both come with a cap. On the left, you can see the sponge that's inside the cap. That cap, I mean, that sponge needs to be kept moist. We don't want standing water in that cap, but it needs to be kept moist. And then above those two caps, there are the guards, is what I call them. On the 550As, they're plastic. The Pro 20s, they're metal. And then above that is the actual probe and the membrane. The yellow piece is the membrane. It twists on and off and can be changed. Um, it needs to be changed at least once a year. If you have your own meters out there, I would, at the end of the summer, dispose of your membrane and put a new one on each spring. Next slide. Here's a closer, kind of clear image of the Pro 20 probe. You can see on the top that guard and then a weight that is can be added to it. And then at the bottom is what the inside of the guard looks like with that yellow membrane. And I think the next slide, Eric. Oh, no, it didn't. I thought it circled, but on the last slide, yeah, the little metal piece right there, that's the actual temperature probe. So the rest of it is to measure dissolved oxygen, where that little metal piece is the actual temperature probe. Okay, now next slide. Hmm. So here is an example of a kit that you're going to get if you borrow a meter from us. Um, There is on the left, that's the cable, and then at the end is the probe that I just talked about. On the right-hand side is the actual meter itself. And then in the middle, I send an extra dissolved oxygen membrane, and I send some solution that needs to go inside the membrane before you screw it back on. This is in case you need to recalibrate. This is in case your meter is not calibrating, which I'll talk about in a minute. This doesn't happen very often. Usually, I'd say out of the 40 some that I send out, maybe two have membranes that were used that I sent out. One membrane should typically last you throughout the year, at least for the summer. It also has a quick start guide that is reminders of how to use the meter, and then just a reminder to return the meter to me with your summer phosphorus samples. So new in 2024, we have this weight that's included in there. So in one of the pockets, you'll find this little weight. Please don't lose it. But if you need to, if you have a pretty deep lake or if it's a little breezy on the day you go out, you can screw this weight into the bottom of the guard and it'll make it a little heavier so it goes straight down. You have to remove it when you're done using it because the cap won't fit on as well with that weight on there. Next. This is all of a picture of those probes. That's what the inside of the dissolved oxygen meter probe looks like. It's a silver tip, and that's what actually where the electricity goes through and the dissolved oxygen is measured between that and those yellow membranes. I think I have a picture of this because I also want to note for people who have their own meters that that probe gets it attracts ions. And so if you have your own meter, you do every year at the end of the year need to take that circular piece of sandpaper and wet it's 400 grit wet sandpaper and you wet it and you just gently sand whatever buildup you have on that probe. For those of you borrowing a meter, I do that every year. It isn't difficult, but is something that needs to be done every year. Okay, so before you are going out to sample, you need to get ready. So first, we want to make sure you have calm and dry weather conditions. Especially those of you who have deeper lakes. This process takes a little bit of time and it's extremely difficult to do if it's windy out. So make sure you have a calm time of day when you are collecting this information. As always, make sure you have your safety equipment and a friend to help with data recording. Take a look at the quick reference guide that's in the kit that I sent you. It has all the tips that you'll need. Make sure you have your data forms because in addition to the meter, you got to write down the data that you're collecting. And you're going to need to connect and turn on your meter 15 minutes prior 10 to 15. It's 15 minutes for the older 550A meters. It's less, it's more like 5 to 10 minutes for the newer Pro 20s. Um, and you need to calibrate your meter, which you do. This is a good picture here on the left. That CAL button on the left, that's how you calibrate. And we do have a video on how to do that. So, like I said, we have videos available online on how to calibrate and how to change your membrane if you are one of the few people that need to do that. Um, just another reminder to warm up your meter prior to calibrating. And you need to calibrate every time you sample. I have been out with people who calibrate at the beginning of the year and then they didn't do it again. And this is something you need to do every time you sample. We have a little bit different meters here at EGLE, but we do the same thing. We get to a site and we calibrate our meter every time. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about sampling at the data sheet. It's very similar to all the ones for every other parameter. If you've been sitting here today, you need to put on your lake name, your county, township, your field ID number, the date and time, any weird conditions you have. But like I said, try not to go out on windy conditions. And then also the sampling depth. You got to make sure you check your sampling depth with either a handheld piece of equipment like something that's weighted that can give you the depth, or a depth finder if you have one. Um, it's important to know your station sampling depth because you don't want to hit the bottom with your sampler. And there was a good question about that I'll get to after in just a little bit. All right, next, we're going to watch how the sampling actually takes place, and then I'll point out a few things I want to highlight from the video.
Hello, my name is Tamara Lipsey, and I'm an aquatic biologist with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Today we're going to demonstrate how to use a YSI Pro 20 meter to measure dissolved oxygen and temperature in lakes using the MiCorps Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program procedures. Before heading out, please make sure you assemble the necessary equipment, including your data sheet, and fill out the data sheet, including the map of the lake at the bottom. You will need your dissolved oxygen temperature meter, safety equipment, data sheet and clipboard, pencil or permanent ink pen, and an anchor. Once you have your equipment assembled, proceed to your monitoring location, which should be located at the deepest point of your lake. You will need to drop an anchor before you get to your sampling location and drift in. The boat needs to be still for a long period of time to get an accurate temperature and dissolved oxygen profile. Be sure to turn on your meter for 5 to 10 minutes to warm up and to calibrate your meter. Details regarding calibration can be found in our YSI Pro 20 calibration video. After calibration, remove the cap from the probe. Do not remove the metal cage. Measurements of temperature and dissolved oxygen will be taken throughout the water column from top to bottom. Follow your dissolved oxygen data sheet for specific depths. To begin, take a measurement 1 foot below the surface of the water. This depth will be marked on the cable of the dissolved oxygen temperature meter. It will take a few moments for the readings to stabilize, especially the dissolved oxygen. Once readings stabilize, record the temperature in degrees Celsius and the dissolved oxygen in milligrams per liter. Continue taking measurements at the depths noted on the datasheet until you reach a depth that is 1 foot above the bottom depth of your lake. Record this last reading. Carefully pull up your meter, make sure the probe is clean, and replace the protective cap. Turn off your meter, and there you have it, a temperature and dissolved oxygen profile.
Okay, a few things to go over. I just want to make sure my sound is on. Yep, you can hear me. So you proceed to the deepest point in your lake, and for this parameter, we say that you have to anchor. You need to anchor just like all the other parameters upwind of the deep basin and then drift back over the deepest spot. But with this parameter, it does take some time, and to get those really nice profiles that Eric talked about at the beginning of our session today, you need to stay still and in one place. And then, as I noted earlier, you must check for the actual depth with your depth finder or another weighted line of some type, or if your lake isn't too deep, you could probably do it with a Secchi disc. Turn on your meter, 5 to 10 minutes, calibrate it, and then take the cap off. Some people forget to do that, and it's only measuring the dissolved oxygen in that cap if you don't take it off. But leave the guard on there that protects that membrane. And then add your weight if it's needed. So taking a measurement, you're going to start at 1 foot deep. And something I'm talking about this year that's a little new to past years, one of my colleagues has been using the dissolved oxygen temperature data to see if it's meeting our cold water lake standard. And one thing she takes a look at the data to make sure it's good data is if the 1 foot deep measurement is greater than about 7 milligrams per liter. That's probably about the lowest it should be near the surface of the water. You're still getting some of that oxygen exchange from the air, like Eric was talking about earlier. So that's just something, even if your meter is calibrating, take a look at that 1 foot deep measurement and see if you're getting something that's expected. If you're getting something close to 1 at the surface, then something's likely wrong. Um, Another note, make sure it should come this way, but make sure you're measuring in milligrams per liter and not that percent saturation. You want to move the probe with a slight jigging motion. Somebody came up to me at the conference and said that's kind of something they joke about together. Are you jigging it? Are you jigging it? Because the probes that we have, they need moving water in order to get an accurate reading. And so by jiggling that probe, you're getting new water to flow across that membrane continuously. The dissolved oxygen reading in milligrams per liter is going to drift quite a bit. You'll be able to get your temperature reading pretty quickly, but the dissolved oxygen reading needs some time to settle. And this is why one of the reasons why you have to stay in one spot for a long period of time. What I tell people is, although you do need to be patient to wait until it settles down, you also can, you're going to the 10th position and, the nearest 0.5 milligrams per liter. So if you're getting a reading that's like 9.2, 9.5, 9.6, 8.9, 9.1, 9.2, 9.6, 9.8, 9.5 is probably a good reading for that particular measurement. And then you're going to go to the next depth on your data sheet. So you'll start at that 1 foot depth, and then you'll go to 5 feet next, and all of the different depths are on that data sheet. We want you to stop 2 to 3 feet above the sediment to protect the probe. Somebody in the Q&A asked what happens if the probe gets into the sediment. It's not a crisis. We just need you to make sure you swish it around in the water and make sure any debris that might have gotten in that guard is rinsed out before you put it away. I have in the past opened some dissolved oxygen meters that have been borrowed that have some sediment in them. So I do want you all to make sure you rinse your probe before you put it back in that rubber case. Okay. So now you've already taken all your samples, you've successfully gotten a profile for your lake. Now it's just some important things to do after the sampling that are just as important as the sampling itself because we want to protect these expensive meters and keep them in good working condition. So you're going to turn off your meter and disconnect your meter from the cable. This is one thing that's hard to show on the online training, but that cable does attach to the bottom of that meter that's on the right. And you connect it and then you twist it to connect it. And at the end of your sampling, I want you to do the opposite. I want you to twist it to the left and disconnect it before you put it away. And what this does, it helps the wire not get kinked. So it's just like your cell phone charger. If it gets kinked too many times, the cable will stop working and the cable is $200 to $300 to replace. So we want to try to keep that cable working as long as possible. So by disconnecting it and wrapping it carefully around the spool, that'll help protect that. Make sure your meter is completely dry before you close the case. Not everyone has these airtight gray cases, but the newer ones that we have bought have these protective cases. They're really airtight. So if you don't make sure your cable is completely dry and that the meter is dry, I have opened more than one of them with them full of mold at the end of the year. So make sure you take some time to dry in a shaded area, but dry out that cable. Store it in a dry location out of the sun. Always keep the sponge damp. That sponge in that gray case needs to be kept damp so that the membrane, the yellow piece, can be kept damp. But we don't want you to store it in standing water. If you keep a bunch of water in there, algae and slime grows. So we want you to just keep the sponge damp. Generally, it'll stay damp if you're taking measurements on a regular basis. And don't, last on this list is do not attach any other weights except for that screw-on weight that we now supply. Um, in the past, people would put, different types of lead shot weights on the cables. Again, that crimps the cables, and so we don't use that practice any longer. And then finally is data entry. Please, as Joe said at our introduction, if you have the ability to enter your data, please do so. You can imagine 45 lakes with many, many depths. It takes a long time to enter dissolved oxygen and temperature data. So please enter your data if you can. Please do it by October 31st, but you could also do it as you take your data. If you enter your data, we do have some tools on our website that you can see those cool dissolved oxygen temperature profiles that Eric showed. And then we still, even if you do enter your own data, we want you to make a copy of your field data sheets to keep for your records and then send them. I just noticed that this address is going to change because this is Jean Ross address. That address will change, but stay tuned for look on the website and on your sheets, and you'll find where to mail those copies to. And then finally, don't forget to return your meter. You should return your meter with those water chemistry samples. So those summer phosphorus and those chlorophyll samples that you take and are delivering either the end of August or September, that's when you need to return your meters as well. It's just the easiest way logistically to get them all back to me in a timely fashion. For sometimes you forget. If that's the case, just please contact me as soon as possible so that we can figure out how to get it back to me in Lansing so that I can maintain it for the next year. As another reminder, just make sure you keep that sponge in there, but no standing water. And remember to disconnect your meter from the cable.
Oh, I'll mention one thing. Just Tamara did a great job of talking about that probe being 2 to 3 feet off of the bottom. The bottom of our lakes on many of our lakes can be strange. What is the bottom? It can be quite fluffy,
Oh,
and
yeah.
our probes are meant to collect in water. And so if you get too close to that kind of this weird sediment water sediment mix, it you might like jump straight to zero, or it drops, and that's not quality data, because again the probe is meant to be collecting dissolved oxygen in water. So just keeping sense of knowing the depth, so what Tamara mentioned, knowing the depth where you're at to make sure that you're off of that weird false bottom is good for data quality as well as your probe.
And I was also, thank you for saying that, Eric, because I somewhere was gonna mention this, that many of our lakes don't have oxygen at the bottom. That's just the nature of stratification in the Midwest. So a lot of the lakes that don't get real deep don't have a lot of oxygen at the end. So if it gets down to close to zero or less than one, no oxygen is no oxygen. So getting so close to the bottom is not really as important in those cases because, like I said, when you're got no oxygen, you're very low oxygen. That's pretty much what we need to know. So I don't want people to worry about like having to get super close to the bottom because in a lot of cases it's not additional information.